Marine reacts to SCP-342, also known as A Ticket to Ride, by the Exploring series. As always, I'm going to be leaving a link to the original video channel down in the description below, so go ahead and make sure that you check them out. I'm assuming it's dealing with the train, but I don't know if it's the ride itself, if it's the ticket, if there's a conductor on the train, because typically anything that's horror related or just weird in general that deals with trains typically has a conductor in it. I don't know if it's going to be dimensional, things like that. But yeah, also just a quick little update as far as the channel itself. During the weekdays, it's just going to be one video. Right now, I'm going to be recording two today, so I can get one out tomorrow morning as well. This one's coming out today on the 14th, a little later in the evening, just to kind of get things situated back and forth, because just the previous 2 days, school kind of just hit me with a lot of work. But other than that, everything should be running smoothly. Just one video on the weekdays and then possibly two videos on the weekends. So we're just kind of play it as it goes. Also, just one last little quick thing. I took up the autofocus from the webcam, so it shouldn't be focusing on the time right now. So without talking too much more, let's go ahead and get to the actual video. But before we do, don't forget to like, subscribe. Really does help me a lot. Hit that notification bell right there. That way you get notified every time I do upload. Sometimes uploading twice a day. Now working on them whenever I can and releasing them early the next day. That way when you all wake up, you have a fresh video first thing in the morning. So without further ado, let's go ahead and see what SCP-342 or A Ticket to Ride is all about.
SCP-342, A Ticket to Ride. Let's take a break for a moment from discussing world-ending threats and alien abominations, and instead talk about something a bit more mundane: a train ticket. Millions and millions of people around the world use mass transportation to travel daily, and generally there is very little uncertainty or fear during those travels. A train or bus operates on a schedule and travels along a predetermined route, meaning that a person boarding one typically knows where they're going and when they'll get there. But what if they didn't? SCP-342 is an anomaly that can make a perfectly ordinary trip anything but. 342 typically takes the form of a mass transit ticket for the closest form of mass transportation, but when held by a person, it will eventually change into a ticket for a form of transportation that person desires to use. This transformation occurs only when not being observed, and afterwards will be indistinguishable from a normal ticket.
Okay, so things are getting a little... okay, so it's the ticket itself, but it's kind of a universal one, but it'll change when someone's not looking at it into the ticket that the person wants to use. Say if they're going on a train. I'm assuming this might just be a train, but I don't know if it could also be a bus or any other form of transportation. I mean, I feel like he did say worldwide. But yeah, just trying to make sure I give myself little reminders of what's going on.
Should this ticket be used and validated, whether by stamp, tearing off the stub, or disposing of it, it will eventually reform into an unused ticket again, ready to be used by another person. The person that used the ticket will begin to feel a growing sense of dread prior to boarding the vehicle, which will only increase once the trip begins. During the trip, the individual will experience a series of anomalous phenomena resembling symptoms of acute paranoid schizophrenia. These phenomena include a perception of darkening outside the vehicle, caused by either fog, premature night, or most commonly, dreary, depressing weather. The individual will hear auditory hallucinations, generally from announcements made by the driver or other passengers, such as mishearing the announcement of the next stop, instead hearing that the individual will never stop. Other passengers and normal objects will take on a frightening appearance, and the individual will experience an almost pathological fear of everyone else aboard the vehicle. Additionally, the individual will find themselves completely unable to disembark from the vehicle, and they will possess the absolute knowledge that it is indeed impossible to get off.
Okay, so it kind of messes with their mind in terms of you wanting and trying to get off. Now, I also don't know if that also connects into, like, maybe the windows are unbreakable, whatever door it is, because I mean there's a picture of a bus stop, so I'm guessing he's insinuating as it also works with buses. And it also seemed like, as far as the ticket itself, it seems like it's only one ticket, right? Like it's not something that like a whole bunch of tickets, right? It's just one. Now, when he starts saying that, you start seeing like the outside is all black, dreary, raining, like foreboding atmosphere, and you start seeing the other passengers as weird type of anomalies, or and you start hearing like weird things. Now, is this something that the person is entering like another dimension, sort of, or a pocket dimension, or is this person still in the actual physical transportation? Like, let's say, for example, the train, and they're just all this is just happening in their head. Like the people are still normal and everything, but he's just seeing them differently. Because this is kind of giving me one of those vibes where it's like a movie where it's like you think that the main character is surrounded by a whole bunch of different weird shit, and then all of a sudden turns out that the guy or person, main character, is just hallucinating in their mind. So, but then again, I feel like he would have added, because that seems like more anti-mimetic or mimetic. But yeah, so I'm wondering if it's all in the head or if it's actually happening.
Along with this, they will be unable to perceive other passengers getting on or off the vehicle, instead seeing them simply appear or disappear in their seats. As an additional effect, or perhaps simply as a result of this, the individual will be unable to be reasoned with or calmed down. Bystanders won't be able to notice any of the strange phenomena the individual is experiencing, but they will report feelings of unease, and will generally attempt to exit the vehicle earlier than intended. The Foundation first discovered 342.
Okay, so the part about the passengers and the fact that the person becomes like incoherent, or like you can't really like reason with them, really now makes you think that's all in the head, and that the other people maybe can get sucked into it possibly, but that's why they usually try to get off. But the person who this is happening to, who had the ticket, I believe he said that he couldn't imagine seeing them getting on or off.
In 1936 in Chicago, and later they learned the importance of always retrieving the ticket after it's been used, using any means necessary. In New York, the ticket was lost for 6 months, resulting in the disappearance of a number of New York citizens. 342 is currently kept in a secure file cabinet at a Foundation facility, as it's no danger when contained. But the Foundation did go through a number of experiments with the ticket. Their first experiment, of course, involved giving the ticket to a D-class and putting him on a bus. And because they weren't sure at the time how it affected other passengers, the agents simply waited at each of the bus's stops instead of being on the vehicle themselves. All the agents managed to catch was the D-class sitting there, or pacing back and forth, or staring out of a window in horror. The last few stops, they couldn't see him at all, and finally, right before the bus was to be parked for the night, they saw him pounding on a window, pleading for help as a strange mist surrounded him. He, of course, was not recovered. The agents spoke afterwards with many of the other passengers, although practically all of them were hesitant to talk or claimed they didn't notice anything unusual. A group of teenagers did have some information, though, saying that the D-class had tried to leave a number of times, but either the doors would close right before he disembarked, or there would be too many people swarming in and out for him to leave, or his pulls on the stop bell would be ignored by the driver. One of the teenagers was particularly bothered about something, but couldn't say what, so the agents put him under hypnosis. He reveals that he had seen the man attempt to leave, but a few people in a crowd of passengers actually held or pushed the man back, without even seeming to realize they were doing it. The D-class also tried to scream at the driver to stop the bus for 10 minutes, but was completely ignored, aside from being told to sit down and be quiet. Two of the teenagers say that the man actually shrieked and stumbled back into his seat when the driver turned to look at him. The teenagers began to ignore the D-class as he stayed quiet in his seat, but he continued to move further back in the bus, without the teens noticing him get up at any point. At the end of the interrogation session, the youngest of the teens screamed, "It was like it swallowed him in the end," and the boy promptly had to be hospitalized for extreme psychosis, as the entire interrogation seemed to be greatly upsetting to the teenagers. So, we have an anomaly that is determined to kidnap people, and is very good at it, seemingly able to use the driver and other passengers to make sure the person doesn't escape. The Foundation gained some info from this test, but now that they know nothing terrible happened to the passengers, they sent another D-Class in, with one agent, Agent Strom, right?
So the most that at least the passengers could be affected is, it doesn't seem like they're going to be affected in a physical way, but possibly mentally, just because the way they were describing what happened to the youngest teenager. So I feel like this is really solidifying that a lot of this is happening in the head, and that even though it is happening physically, that the other passengers still can't kind of recall. I feel like their mind is consistently getting like reset every couple of seconds possibly, so that they don't know kind of what's going on, but they remember like small little moments, and then that's why they use the hypnosis on the teenagers to try to figure out like, kind of what went on. But for the most part, it doesn't seem like the other passengers get affected as much. But I'd be curious to see if he goes into a little more detail as to maybe whether or not they may or may not know why this ticket. I mean, because it's supposed to be the ticket, but I feel like there's other. Like I feel like maybe the ticket itself possesses the driver, the transportation method, like the train or the bus, But I don't know. There's a lot of questions that are still kind of coming up, and I'm pretty sure a lot of them aren't going to be answered.
Riding along, this time on a subway. The trouble started right away, though. As soon as 342 was handed to the ticket taker, the D-Class immediately became aggravated and verbally accosted the woman. Afterwards, a pair of security guards, seemingly in a trance, attempted to separate Strom from the D-Class, quietly saying, "One at a time, please." Strom was forced to knock one of the guards down so that he could make it onto the subway. Aboard the train, the D-Class became exceptionally quiet and still, despite being one of their most violent prisoners. Strom began testing and interviewing him, taking various fluid samples and checking his heart and brain for abnormalities, until he quietly said he wanted to be let off the train. Strom informed him he could get off in a few hours, causing the D-Class to become extremely aggressive, jumping up and down and against the walls, swinging on bars, and howling. Strom knocked him out with his truncheon and handcuffed him, holding up a badge to the other passengers that said he was a US Marshal. Strom found that the man had entered REM sleep after only 3 minutes, which is especially unusual for someone that had been knocked unconscious. After he woke back up, Strom told him they were aborting the experiment, and he would help him get off the train. They were prevented from doing so by a crowd of people boarding, and even the second time, when Strom held up his badge and told people to remain in their seats, they were still stopped by the crowd. Strom claimed that the D-Class was pulled away from him by hands that didn't belong to any passengers, but fortunately they were handcuffed to each other. In the chaos, the D-Class clung to Strom hard enough to cause bruises, and Strom's badge was knocked out of his hand and he was hit in the side of the head. While riding to the next stop, Strom grew more aggressive, interrogating other passengers to find out who hit him, going so far as to vigorously shake some passengers, throwing one man to the floor and striking another in the face. Strom attempted to communicate with some other agents at the next stop, but both sides reported the other voice coming through like a quiet, frightened child. The D-Class begins pounding on the door, and Strom threatens to sedate him, which quickly stops the man. He proceeds to say, "No, that's how it started. A lonely, dark ride in unknown parts of the country. Travelers and drifters, the unattached. They would fall asleep with a bottle of booze, and, oh God, when they woke up they'd still be going. Still be on. Don't you get it? They wake up, and even though they slept for hours, they still be on. Who knows where." At the next stop.
I mean, I don't know if anyone else has ever used the public transportation and you've ever fallen asleep on it. I mean, I've fallen asleep on a train as well. I've fallen not too much on buses, but like I would catch myself like kind of drifting asleep. But I have had moments where I've missed my stop, and typically you end up in a part of a certain city, a certain location that you're not very familiar with, and honestly, like I wasn't like terrified of what was going on. I mean, obviously, maybe if something like this happened, it's a whole different story. But it's definitely felt uneasy because then I'm like, I wonder if my phone still has power, so I can find out where the closest next bus stop is to get back. If my phone isn't charged, then I gotta see if there's I have to may even have to ask around and say, hey, where's the closest bus stop? I can see a time of when it's gonna get there, and then just that feeling of being in a place that's I guess you would consider foreign to you because you don't know the area. I mean, it's great if you want to go exploring in places that you haven't been to, but if that's not your intention, then you could kind of see like how just kind of uneasy you would feel, and especially if, in this case scenario, if this something like this happened, that's like cranking it up by like 100, maybe 1,000.
A group of agents waited to board the train and lead the D-Class off. They were met with resistance by the large crowds until one agent fired his gun into the air, causing the train to be evacuated and cordoned off. The driver was told to shut down the subway, but he appeared greatly confused, so the Foundation shut down power to the subway. They then attempted to take the D-Class off of the train, but were unsuccessful. Although one would presume that the man wanted to get off, no efforts on the agent's parts worked, with many of them claiming that he was holding on to one of the bars to prevent being dragged off. Strom said that he's not holding on to anything. Instead, there's some sort of wall. The other agents realized that they were holding on to both of the man's hands, making the whole situation pretty strange. In a last-ditch effort, the agents attempted to set up equipment to dismantle the subway car, but in a moment when they weren't watching, the subway doors closed, and it began moving, carrying the D-Class and Strom. They caught up with it at the next stop, where passengers began boarding despite orders not to, and they later found Strom 8 kilometers away, comatose on a subway platform, blood on one end of his handcuffs matching that of the D-Class. Despite the trauma from going through that ordeal, or perhaps because of it, Strom volunteered to be the subject of the next test, claiming that he could provide much better communication throughout the situation. He even went so far as pleading with an O5 to be allowed to carry out the test. It was approved, and he was joined by 2 other agents on the trip, both close friends of his. It's believed that having close friends nearby kept Strom sane throughout the ordeal, and he was able to calmly describe and explain some of the anomalous effects transpiring. He seemed to accept the inevitability of what was going to happen, as he never brought up the idea of getting off the train. Eventually, the other agents attempted to get him off the train, but a homeless man that had been traveling with them suddenly hurled one of them across the train, breaking the man's neck. The homeless man was shot 4 times, and at the next stop, Foundation personnel began transporting the vagrant in an ambulance, but his body disappeared when passing under the ruin of a train bridge in an abandoned part of town. Strom and the other remaining agent continued on the train, with Strom experiencing more and more severe hallucinations, and the other agent now noticing more mild hallucinations. After the train reached the end of the line, Strom began to slowly drift forward towards the front of the train, passing through solid material in the process, seemingly oblivious of the process. When pointed out by the other agent, he began running towards the back of the train, but stopped in the middle, pounding against the air. Strom said that he was at the back of the train, and it's pulling out of the station. The other agent tried to help, but soon Strom was being quickly pulled on the ground towards the front of the train, his fingernails scratching the floor.
Well, one thing for sure, this picture, I don't know if anybody else got a chill, but I kind of got a chill just looking at this. But in any case, so a lot of this just keeps really going back to like it's all how a certain person is seeing it. Like going back to when the SCP Foundation was trying to get agents to, I guess, forcibly take out the D-Class personnel, and that they said that they were grabbing both his hands, but that to them it looked like he was grabbing on to something, which didn't make sense to me. But then when Strom was talking about it, he said that he wasn't doing any of that. So, and then right here, now he's getting Looks like he was getting dragged up to the front, and I'm pretty sure he said front, if not to the rear. Either way, now his nails are digging into the ground and scratching that. Now, from what it would probably seem from what I've been hearing is that to the other passengers that are in there as well, they're probably just seeing him walking up there, but to him, he's getting dragged, right? So a lot of this is always happening from different points of view, and it could look vastly different.
He ended up in the conductor's compartment at the front, where he began to cry out in terror. The other agent pulled out their gun and attempted to mercy kill Strom, but couldn't shoot through the reinforced glass. The other agent later reported that they saw a creature that looked like an enormous spider with a conductor's hat, wrapping Strom in a web and then tossing him out the window like it was air. The creature then turned to the other agent and told him to exit the train. The agent was recovered later at the back of the train, continuing to pull the trigger on their empty gun. The theory proposed based on this experiment is that when an individual uses 342 to board a vehicle, they are actually boarding two different vehicles. One of them is the normal version that other passengers are on, but the other is the anomalous version. Both vehicles overlap one another completely and travel at the same rate. The individual that used the ticket perceives this second version much more than other passengers, but it affects everyone to various degrees. When the normal version reaches the end of its journey, the anomalous version continues going, taking the individual with it. As for where it goes, and what's going on with the weird spider conductor, your guess is as good as mine. The Foundation proceeded to go through a number of more tests to see if they could better control the situation and the outcome. They set up a fake transportation system involving a Foundation bus with one of their personnel driving and a D-class as the only passenger, but nothing happened. They went further to elaborate the system, including having a number of agents board with the D-class, each presenting a ticket and the D-class presenting 342, but nothing happened. They tried to make loud announcements throughout the process, including denying one agent passage because he didn't have a ticket. But it seems whatever dictates how 342 functions wasn't taking the bait. Next, they tried bringing in civilians, unaware of the experiment, each using tickets distributed by the Foundation, but the D-class was still capable of leaving at any time. They then tried switching out the driver for a civilian, which triggered something. The driver was fine until the D-class boarded using 342, at which point they became extremely bewildered by the controls of the bus, even if it was the same model they were used to, and they all claimed that they couldn't drive this one. Okay, they're getting somewhere, so they allowed the drivers to use their normal buses, but set it up with different corporations and public departments so that the driver would only pick up the D-class and then stop shortly after. When the time came for the drivers to go along the planned route, they diverted back to their normal routes, saying that they didn't have the time to change their routines for egg-headed paper pushers. In hindsight, the researchers for 342 believed that the ticket was luring them into creating a situation where it could fully activate, but they persisted. They made a deal with a specific driver that he would go along his normal route, but halfway through he would switch with another driver, one of the Foundation personnel. He was offered considerable compensation for this, and told if he failed to cooperate, he would lose his job. The D-class approached the bus stop where he was going to be picked up, and 342 altered into a ticket specific to that bus, signaling its effects. The prisoner was sent aboard the bus, and as the driver pulled to a stop and attempted to get out of his seat, the brakes on the bus failed and began speeding down a hill. The bus crushed a young girl crossing the street and kept going. The driver was still in his seat, and the Foundation attempted to get him to stop the bus, but he refused. They set up roadblocks and punctured two of the bus's tires, but the driver still managed to get the bus on the highway, going 130 miles per hour in the wrong direction. The last statement they received from him was, "I'm not pulling over. I'm a driver, and that's what I do. That's my purpose. I don't need to switch. I can get him where he's going." He ended up driving the bus off of the edge, just as a sniper shot him in the head, and the bus exploded in a fiery blaze as it crashed into the ground. A bystander later reported that she saw an identical second bus rise out of the smoke and open its doors. A single burning silhouette, shaped like a human, came out of the flames and entered the bus, which pulled away and disappeared.
Okay, so plan was regular driver, have him switch out, or have him pick up the D class, switch out, but then SCP Foundation member who's going to be the driver. But obviously that didn't go to plan, but that ended up working. So why is it that didn't happen? Or is it possible maybe because it has to do with an actual stop and picking someone up? I mean, it just seems like a lot of these things have to be very specific in terms of how 342 actually operates. And I honestly, the spider part, it was a completely fucking left field type thing. Because honestly, I was thinking of, I don't know, whatever I was thinking, I knew it wasn't a spider in my mind. But, yeah. And I don't know, I mean, it seems like for the most part, it was eventually the same experiment, just a couple of tweaks. And I don't know, I can't really make or guess of it. If someone doesn't know, please let me know down in the comments because it's going to be bothering my head for a while. But obviously it worked and they ended up crashing though.
They tried the same setup 3 more times, but with trains instead. And each time the D-Class happened to get aboard a different train, where they were taken away. Things weren't working in the Foundation's favor, and all they were really doing was satisfying whatever was in charge of 342. Things came to a climax when an agent was trying to help a D-Class off of a train, and ended up getting decapitated when their neck got caught in a door. This ultimately resulted in the end of the Foundation's research into 342, as so far it has only resulted in the useless waste of life. On a side note, there had been several reports of some sort of specter haunting the train systems, carrying a bundle in his lap, the size of a human head. Before the end of the research, however, one doctor had volunteered to have 342 ripped by a ticket taker, but then not board the vehicle. He then began keeping...
Wait, that's kind of what was kind of going on my head too right now. It's like, what if somebody had it and they got a punched or ticketed or whatever validated, but they didn't hop on? Would it have an effect if it ended up getting on another train? Would the ticket change? You know, things like that.
In a journal of his experiences, which was filled with feelings of severe anxiety, neurosis, fear, and paranoia, notably an unrelenting fear of roads. In time, he refused to ever leave work for fear of traveling, and became a nervous wreck. He was transferred to some small project, where he continually bothered the other personnel by either only walking between destinations, always arriving late, or always asking for a ride home, as his brand new car kept breaking down for some reason. After finally attacking a tow truck driver for suggesting he should take a bus home, he was confined to house arrest. In the end, he was reported missing by his wife, who claimed his final words were, "Well, I guess it's time to go." Neighbors report the sounds of a large vehicle driving away. Thick tire tracks were found on his suburban street, and a suitcase filled with his clothing was found by the side of the road. The final addendum is written by Dr. Clef, taking over from the head of 342 Research, Dr. Gunsther. Clef says that a few days ago, he and Gunsther were going over some old files, and stumbled across the file for 342. Gunsther removed it from its envelope, and the two discussed it as it sat on the table. The two left to attend a showing of Repo, the Genetic Opera, with a couple other doctors, but Clef noted that Gunsther became somewhat perturbed after presenting his ticket. He continued to appear preoccupied and distressed throughout the show, but Clef assumed he was just reacting to the musical. Afterwards, the group discussed going to a bar, but Gunther said that it was time for him to leave, and he gave Clef an envelope. He told Clef to keep it safe, and wished him the best in his future endeavors. He boarded a taxicab, which sped off unusually quickly into the night. Inside the envelope were 2 identical tickets for the musical, but one of them transformed into a $20 bill as they approached a bar with a $20 cover charge. Clef realized what had happened and raced back to where Gunther had gotten into the taxi. They discovered that the street the taxi sped down was actually an alley that ended in a brick wall. No trace of Dr. Gunther has been seen since. Gunther must have realized what had transpired when he opened his wallet at the musical to purchase a drink, and then proceeded to sit through the show regardless. Clef ponders the amount of mental fortitude it must have taken Gunther to remain calm during the musical, and he's struck with a sense of loss at his passing. Clef requests then that 342's file is permanently sealed. There isn't really some grand lesson here, I suppose.
Yeah, I was gonna say just keep it locked up. I mean, don't use it in any form of sense. I mean, it doesn't seem to really have any effect whatsoever until it gets validated. And somebody, I mean, even if you don't hop on whatever it is, like the train or the bus, it's still gonna have some effects, but not as much. Now, as far as the actual ticket itself, now I know secure, contain, protect. They're not just gonna destroy something unless it's considered like world ending in terms of like, hey, it's gonna end the world right now, and then I believe there's the whole process of going up to the O5 council, and that they have to get a order to actually take it out. But I mean, did they ever try maybe testing the durability of the ticket? Just, I don't know, for experiment wise?
Or some moral that I could explain to you. It's just a really weird transforming ticket that takes people on a doom train conducted by a spider creature into some other reality. The concept of shadow or ghost trains, vehicles that carry departing souls to an afterlife, isn't really a new one, but this one is a bit more disturbing, as these people aren't exactly ready to depart. It's an SCP that leaves you with more questions than answers, and might unnerve you a little. But as long as you don't take a bus or a train every day, you're probably fine.
Alright, so let's go ahead and talk about that for a minute. Now, I only got like 2 ideas, more like experiments that they could have tried possibly, have they ever tried putting an SCP that was more humanoid in there that can kind of have an advantageous ability to help it survive, maybe even get off the train, break through the window, maybe, I don't know, if like reality bending, or an SCP that can regenerate itself, like healing, or an SCP in general that could maybe survive this type of scenario. And 2, have they ever thought about, I mean, I don't think it would be possible, but have they, I mean, I'm pretty sure they haven't, but did they ever try trying to kill the conductor? Because it's supposed to be a big spider. Because the way they also described it, Strom, was that he was getting wound up in a web and then was thrown out through the window. So obviously there's at least an open window in there, but I don't know if the reason why you can't break out is because since this window is there and you get thrown out, that's probably when you already get fully immersed into whatever dimension or reality the spider's probably trying to get you in. I don't know, it's just 2 things that I thought they could have tried. I mean, obviously I think I mentioned it during the video as well, maybe destroying the ticket, but then again, I understand secure, contain, protect. And sometimes that trying to destroy an SCP can actually have negative effects, from way back when with the GOC, when they tried to throw a chair into a wood chipper, and then it could start manifesting little splinters in people's throats and whatnot. I feel like that just stuck with me because just the feeling of that. Ugh. But I mean, other than that, didn't really have too much to say, because a lot of it was kind of more the, hey, it just happens because it happens, and they obviously tried quite a few experiments to kind of see what was going on, but it seems like at the end they figured out at least a couple things that could trigger it, what happens, but not really answering probably a lot of questions that they even had. So, all right, so if you made it this far, here's just like a little snippet. As far as for myself personally, just a quick little story that when I was in Syria, I mean, granted, we weren't given a lot of food. We had 3 meals a day, but it was always little, very small, short portions, and they weren't necessarily the healthiest of options. And that because of that, we would still go work out, even though we were pulling posts, working on our QRF technically. And then when you finally got your rest cycle, it was damn near fucking impossible to actually go to sleep, and you wouldn't even really get a good night's rest. But we would still work out quite a bit, which would cut into that rest time. And then we were getting really cut. We actually started to look really good, everybody, right? But we also started to get like quite a bit weaker, right? Because we're not getting as much calories, and we're kind of thinning out. And because of this, I was trying to preacher curl on. And you get your arms down here and you're trying to pull up, and then I don't know what happened, but at one point I just felt a sharp pain in my lower back, and that was kind of really my first moment of having a back spasm, which I don't know if you've ever had them. They're insanely painful, take a little while to go away, but that was my first introduction to having one of those. And then throughout the rest of my military contract, I ended up getting them again. I got it really bad one time a couple months before I was getting out, to the point where I couldn't even walk, and it was just painful. I would lay down, still hurt, and ever since I've been out, I've had them every now and then. So I've had quite a bit of back spasms, so which kind of also was amplifying myself to get into personal training. I'm pretty big into fitness. That was a little thing about me. I suffer from pretty bad back spasms. Even sitting down like this kind of hurts every now and then, which is why you might just always see me readjusting. Just know that my lower back, especially from the military, if you've been in, it takes quite a beating, especially in those 4 years. I've heard like every 1 year is supposed to equal to 4 regular years, so I don't know how true that is, but I like to think it does, at least physically. So other than that, nothing too much channel-wise. I believe I said in the beginning that weekdays are going to have 1 video, and then weekends most likely 2. I'm also working on a little more of gameplay as well, because I really also wanted to get into gameplay, and I got like a little sniper montage from Modern Warfare that I'm working on, and I've been working on it just slowly every day, so this one's taking me a little longer to edit, but it's mainly when I have a little bit of free time, I'll work on it, because I mean those ones sometimes I'm recording up to 2 or 3 hours just trying to get a little good gameplay, so expect that here pretty soon. And that's gonna go ahead and do it for this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, really does help me a lot. Hit that dislike button if you didn't like it. It helps me for the channel. If you're curious to see what's coming up next, check the description down below. You're gonna see a list of about 5 videos. From top to bottom, it's gonna be how I view them. But until then, I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.